Good afternoon, Lee McClure. Welcome to the first section of the Threats and Vulnerability class that began, well, technically yesterday since we were closed on Monday. Congrats for making it to the final class in the program before the final project. Getting close there. That's cool. This class is the last full class in the program. It's a standard 10 unit, 10 lessons. And so we'll cover the first 5 today. I'm going to do a little bit of workshop-y stuff as we talk a little bit about a few things. I know that the current student who has been in the program with us for a while and getting close to the end now actually is running out of space on the GSN3 VM. So we'll talk briefly about that, and I'll probably end up helping you in that with our one-on-one later tonight as well. But also it's a good thing to cover. We don't usually mess with the GSN3 VM itself, but this is one of those rare cases where we would. Future students shouldn't have this issue, but we'll get to that. Nonetheless, the first 5 lessons that we'll cover tonight are basically the introduction, which is all about the setup, which is why I'm going to cover that GSN3 stuff. We do have a new version of the topology. It's the same base topology we've seen, but with some tweaks for the exercises we'll do in this class. We will actually only be using the topology for 2 lessons. One of them, I believe, is the primarily, or maybe it's 3, but definitely the lesson 3, baselining and auditing. The exercise in that lesson is in the topology in GNS3. And then I believe it is lesson 8. Nope, wrong, 9. Once again in the GNS topology. But in addition to a new GNS topology, we are also introducing a number of new virtual machines. And this includes a full version of the Kali Linux VM set up to work with some additional VMs that we've built to be both target and server. And as you'll see, actually next week, we will be doing a pretty elaborate, using 3 different virtual machines, a spear phishing campaign using what's called the Social Engineering Toolkit, which is a piece of software that's available as part of the Kali suite and others. And so we will be talking about that a little bit later today. So to begin with, there is some information in the first lesson, of course. There's always some new. There's some comparison and contrast stuff with regard to threats. You know, we've talked about different types of threats. We've carried out, in effect, some threats ourselves, at least against our simulated targets. We've done SQL injection and other types of exploits. And so we understand the different types of threats, and we understand some of the different types of threat actors at a high level, but there's some additional information in this unit and kind of a different matrix-like, and really the way the exercise has even been set up is there's kind of a starter spreadsheet that you can download and then fill in and populate the information to sort of analyze and compare and contrast and know a little bit more about threats than just what they are and sort of where they rank in the grand scheme of things. But then, as usual, for the first lesson of a hands-on class of this nature, we have a lot of setup information. Now, you would have set up VirtualBox long ago in network foundations, but one of the things we want to make sure that we do in this course, if it wasn't done then, I usually mention it in the videos because I know it's coming, but it's not required to add what's called the VirtualBox extension pack. But the Kali Linux VM requires that extension pack to be installed. So you're going to want to follow the instructions to make sure that you're all up to date. And or if you're not going to update your VirtualBox, you're going to have to dig a little deeper into the VirtualBox website to get the extension pack that matches your version. Otherwise, you can update to the latest VirtualBox and then apply the extension pack. That shouldn't have any impact on any of your other virtual machines, but it will set you up to be able to run some of the new ones that you'll be downloading as part of this class. Then beyond that, there's kind of the standard traditional setup, except that I know, like I said, we've run into this a few times before with students. And so I'm going to share my desktop, and what we're going to do is take a look at a couple things. Oh, my little windows are always in my way, it seems. There we go. I can minimize that. I've got a few things up. We'll come back to the one on the right. I want to focus on here at the moment, the one in the middle, the GSN3 VM. We very seldom ever do much on that one because generally it just sits in the background while we're working in GNS3. And it is actually running all the little mini Docker appliances and virtual machines that we're running in our topologies, right? And but what's happened to our current student is that the the Docker appliance, I mean the space on the VM is actually run out. I actually believe, make that partition on the GSN3 VM. It has two partitions. It has a root partition of 20 gigs, which I believe is too small. And then they have one that is 100 gigs that stores your projects and things. But sadly, the Docker appliances, which we depend on pretty heavily in our topologies, are actually all stored, at least their root copy, in that root directory. And so that ends up filling up, especially if you end up getting too many. And most in future, this issue will go completely away. But what it comes down to is that some of you folks that started, like the current student, at the very beginning of this program, the appliances we were using were coming from my Docker Hub account. And so they were T. Lee McJr. pull paths. Those are still available for other uses and for your own future use if you wanted, but we've made effectively, rebranded and remade them as WASU and have a WASU pull path. This class only uses the WASU ones, and now the older classes have been updated to do that as well. But some of you who had some of the earlier network defense classes that were using the T. Lee McJr. pull paths, that means that you have too much stuff. So if you come to the VM, we don't usually do this, but it has its own little menu. And we can, hang on one second, I'm so sorry. What's going on with my sound? I need to be able to, oh, I know what's going on. 1 second. Anyway, sorry, I had a little thing I had to deal with here locally, so I'm back. So anyway, we don't usually come here, but there is this command at the second down here, the third down, I guess, really, the shell command, which basically gets us to a command prompt just like any other Ubuntu VM. And we can do things like df, which shows you how much space. And as you can see in my copy, the dev SDA1 is the main root partition, and it is about 85% full. This is about where I expect us to be. I have a mix of different things. And then, of course, the op partition, which is SDB1, is bigger and has only a little bit free used. So, this is what's happening to you and the current student, is that root partition is filled up. And so there is basically Docker is installed on here to run in the background those Docker images. And so if you actually type Docker images at the prompt, it's going to list all these different appliances, and you'll see that I've still been, for my own use, still using the ones that are mine, like T. Lee McJr. Snort Appliance 1, T. Lee McJr. Net Defense 01, etc. But you're going to need, and what's going to happen when you try to import the new project is it's going to bring in the WASU versions, and there's really not enough room for both sets. So it's really actually fairly easy. You only have to use a Docker RMI, which is a remove image command, and then you have two choices. You can type in the full path of that's spelled out there, like T. Lee McJr. Snort 1 appliance or whatever the case may be, or this image ID, which is this strange little hash over here. That, so like if we were going to delete this last one, the net top Docker image, it would be 1332C25EC31B. I could type in and delete it that way, or I could type in that LUCADRDERI / new top ping Docker image, and I could get rid of that image. Now, the other reason, besides having potentially both the T. Lee McJr. and the WASU sets of appliances that you may be running out of space, is that you may have actually played around yourself and added some other things. Some of these, like the Kali Linux and the Ubuntu and the Open vSwitch, we would expect because they're part of our standard topologies and we use them. But like that bottom one is obviously one I was just playing with and added. And so I really don't need it. I don't believe I use it in any kind of topology. So just to show how that works, I can go ahead and delete it by that ID of 25EC31B. Make sure I got that right. It looks like that's correct. And so if I then run that Docker space RMI for Docker remove image, and that give it that number, or I could have given it the full path. The number is a little shorter in this case. and then it will run off, delete that image from the appliance. Delete it. And then if I hit the up arrow a couple times and rerun Docker images, we'll see that it's no longer at the bottom. If I run the df command, we'll see that I've actually added back 3%. Now I'm only at 82% use instead of 85%. So that's what we're going to do. If you watch the video before and you do it on your own, it's actually pretty easy. What you'll want to do is just go ahead and delete all the T. Lee McJr. ones, and then when you import that project, there'll be plenty of room to pull in all the WASU ones, and then you'll be good to go for future. The T. Lee McJr. and WASU ones, if we update them in future, we'll update the WASU ones, since you're a learner for life. So if you were to come back in 6 months, a year, a couple years, whenever, and want to retake one of the classes, as you know, you can, and you want to look at the new updated material, if we had new updated topologies or appliances, they would be the WASU ones. So those are the ones you'll want going forward. So that's about all there is to that. I am not going to play with GNS3 because GNS3 is, except for that issue being hit by a couple students, and sadly, sorry, you as well for this class, it's not one that we have to mess with very often. So I'm just going to issue the shutdown command. I have to do it as sudo though. And that way I can just shut down the GSN3 VM. Now for the moment, I'm going to stop my screen share. And we'll come back to, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to do this. So we'll just keep chatting here for a bit. So the real big setup things are, we're going to put the VirtualBox extension into our VirtualBox, either by upgrading VirtualBox and using the latest, or digging into their site and finding the one that goes with your version. Either is an option, as long as you get the extension pack loaded. And then you're going to install this GSN3 topology that goes with it. And I'll help you later tonight if you haven't followed this lesson and already done it. We chatted a little bit about it on Slack earlier too, but I'll help you later tonight and get that cleaned up so you can get moving on. And the second lesson is what's called indicators of compromise. This is a really important thing to learn, and there's all different kinds of what we call indicators of compromise. And they range from, if things all of a sudden, a perfectly, functioning PC starts to act weird, pop up weird messages, or, things, and maybe there's a virus on it, right? And so it's these kind of things, but sort of on steroids and going into more detail. If we're getting anomalous behavior, we have accounts that we didn't expect to be there, we have files we didn't expect to be there, we have a hard drive filling up when we didn't expect that to happen. These are the kind of things that we want to pay attention to, as I've mentioned in other classes, and I tell folks in IT and security classes, and even development, to be honest, if you're not looking at the logs that you're generating, if you're not, especially when you've got an error situation, you're not doing your job. We need to monitor. We had a whole class on logging and monitoring, so we want to know what's going on, and we want to be aware of our systems that we secure and maintain. So, like the servers that I run, I can tell you within 1% or 2% of how much space they are setting at. It's 42% used on one machine, it's 14% on another that's a newer with a bigger hard drive. I run a lot of simple websites for people, so there's not that much space being taken up. Even my FTP servers I host for clients are pretty small amount of data. We take off the old data every once in a while. So I know generally how much, space I have. And if you remember, I believe in the logging and monitoring class, there was even, or maybe it's in this one, but there was a discussion. Oh, I guess it is in this one. There's a discussion about how, once an exploit of a website, an old FTP site years ago was uncovered because the system admin noticed that a web server, that an FTP server that was only 40% full for weeks and weeks, all of a sudden was at 98% full. And that can be a real big indicator of compromise. And in that case, it was. And so there's a lot of discussion about the different types of indicators of compromise. You need to be aware of them in the security field. You need to be cognizant of them. You need to be aware of them yourself for the systems you're responsible for, but also is something that you might have to do as training, because users will sometimes just think, oh, this computer sucks, and they won't report when it starts doing weird things. And the reality is, some places can't afford good computers, or they don't put a lot of money into those front end systems. So maybe they are slow. Maybe the network's congested. But if it's still, even if that's the baseline, at some point, if it seems to deviate from that and get way worse, then that could be an indicator. And we want to teach even basic users some of these basic concepts so that they can report to us when something suspicious is going on. All kinds of things. I still remember one of the sort of worst breaches, at least of a money cost, that I saw a client that I helped clean up from deal with years ago was a case of the person had received an email, a spearfish, basically, very targeted spearfish. They accepted that the email was coming from somebody that they were corresponding with, and so they weren't surprised to get this email and even to get a picture kind of attachment. So they tried to open it. It did not open anything, and they thought, oh, I'll ask that person later, and they moved on. But that's the kind of thing that is an indicator of compromise. If you, on your own machine, or any user in your organization, double clicks on what is ostensibly a .jpeg, and it doesn't come up in the Windows photo viewer or the picture viewer or whatever the default viewer is, then that's probably a problem. In this case, it was because it was, picture.jpg space 200 spaces out to .exe, and really, of course, she had run a Trojan that had opened up a back door on her machine and a keylogger and things like that. Fun games, right? That's what we face in our field. And so, the fact that she, if that person had at that very moment not just checked with that person and with the other who they thought they were getting the email from, but their IT person, and said, hey, Bill sent me this email. I tried to open the picture, but it didn't come up. So can you take a look at that? That would have stopped it right then. Very likely the IT person would have been able to spot that, oh my gosh, that's an executable. What did we do? And we can unplug this from the network. And they wouldn't have been able to the next day to capture her banking login credentials and end up stealing $20,000 of transferring money out of their account in small chunks over a while before they got caught. So these are the kind of things we have to be aware of. And so lesson 2 is all about indicators of compromise, talks about different types, and has a couple case studies. Then I mentioned the phrase baselining, and that's a super important concept. And that's what lesson 3 is about. And it can be done in all different kinds of ways. We have an exercise in lesson 3 that is kind of a simple exercise, to be honest. It's a review of sort of some command line stuff using some of our basic scanning tools. And it's really just kind of, it would be the most rudimentary way you could do a baseline. But in our topology, you're going to need to do some scans of different machines and different segments of the topology in the network. And you're going to want to not just run those scans, those nmap scans, you're going to run particular ones, and you're going to basically use command line redirection to append them to various files so that you basically have this report that you can save. And then, of course, this becomes your baseline. Theoretically, if we then, over time, if this was a real network and we had at least done this, we had scanned our networks and saved all the servers we found, all the ports that were open, and then a month from now, we go redo those scans again, and we see there's a new server, it's not one we expected, or there's another port open on a machine that, once again, is not something we expected, then this would let us do this baselining and auditing concept. Now, of course, in the real world, if you will, of not just playing in our topology to get the concept, but if you're out there in, enterprise network, many of the things that we learned about in logging and monitoring, many of those higher end systems, whether they're open source or commercial, many of those systems allow us to do baselining. They will do it by analyzing that data over time for us. And then, of course, they can be set to alert when, if our normal network traffic at 3 o'clock in the morning is just a trickle of servers talking to each other and some automatic processes, and then all of a sudden the monitoring system sees that there's a huge spike in traffic or a huge spike in CPU use on a particular machine, then it can alert and flag this. And it's all based on this concept of we need to establish a baseline. What is our network? What machines are on it? What ports are open? What rules are there? What systems are there? And it's all part of doing the assessments we do as part of security to basically take stock of our situation. And then we want to compare the current situation to that baseline every so often as part of our auditing process. So whether that's just because we're going to have regulators come in and look at us, but more likely it's on a regular basis. Every quarter we're going to run certain scans and certain types of things. And this could include nmaps, vulnerability scanning, other types of pen testing, all kinds of things. And then we're going to compare that back to what our baseline is. And if, like I said, we find that there are ports open we didn't expect, it could be that there's a new server up because development put a new test server up. Now, we should have been informed of that and not just find it in a scan after it's been up for a while, obviously. But if we did, then that would tell us that there's something wrong with our policy. We need to put a new policy in place that, okay, Dev, when you spin up a new server, we need to be informed so we can put it in our monitoring setup and we can maintain it and secure it. And so things like that. So the baselining and auditing is basically, like I said, a very important concept, and it's very tied to compliance with many of the regulations. Depending upon the industries you're in, which of those frameworks you have to operate under. But one thing, as I said, that you want to remember and pay note to, it's just a small thing that can happen. But in the we've done things before and learned some basics all the way back to network defense or network foundations of some basic command line stuff. So like if you use the straight up and down, the pipe symbol as we call it, you can take output of something and pipe it through more, so you get a page at a time. It doesn't just scroll off. We can output things. We can take the output of something. We did this before or talked about it. Nmap has its own ways and flags to output its reports, but we're using a command line redirection in this case of this exercise, because we want to, and we're not just using one greater than arrow, because that says take the output and write it to that file, but we're using two. That's the thing to note in this lesson, because the reason we're using two is because that appends it, so that way you can run multiple scans of different machines in a segment and save it all to the same segment report effectively, and you'll end up with a few reports of all the information that you've been able to identify about the topology. Now then, lesson four is on social engineering. We've talked about social engineering. We've had some examples of social engineering mentioned in the courseware and in our video lectures and workshops occasionally, exploits that have happened by it. These are, and so this lesson lesson four is a very detailed lesson. It's a lot of fun, actually, I believe, because it goes into very good detail, some really cool examples of social engineering types of attacks. And one of the things that it covers is not just all the different types of social engineering, like trying to impersonate somebody, or of course the things we understand like spear phishing and phishing types of attacks. These are all trying to manipulate people, or the classic, like I said, the impersonation. You call and pretend you're IT, or you call and pretend so that you can get somebody, trick them into giving your password. I think I've mentioned this in a previous class, and maybe more than one. So if it's one of those stories that you've heard 1,000 times, I apologize. But one of my favorite bank heists in the world actually was carried out by up in the Midwest a number of years ago. A team of criminals and hackers basically decided to start targeting banks for bank robberies, but digital bank robberies. They didn't come in with a mask and a gun and a note. They actually had one of their people walk in coveralls with a laptop bag and clipboard, and they pretty much walked up to the front reception. He's like, "I'm sorry, I'm here to fix, trying to find the order." And the receptionist literally says, "Oh, you Sally's computer." "Oh yeah, Sally, yeah." And then he's guided back to Sally's computer. Sally's at lunch. They've been casing this place for a while. They've done their research. They kind of know some things. So, and of course, you can almost guarantee that somebody's got, in a big organization, there's somebody's computer down or acting weird or something. So, what I love about this guy is he went in and he literally fixed Sally's computer. But while he was in there, underneath the desk, he spliced into their network and put their own Wi-Fi access point right underneath her desk. And then from a hotel across the street, or very near to they basically were able to then Wi-Fi into that access point and be inside the network. And of course, he had learned some things from Sally's computer, probably her password written on a Post-it note there, whatever. They got in, they swam around, they dug in deeper, and then they transferred large sums of money off to another account. And then they moved on and did it to another bank and another bank. The problem was they got in grid, like lots of criminals. They ultimately get greedy. If you're making lots of money, then why not keep doing it? Why not one more, right? So if they'd have stopped at a couple, they probably would have got away with it, but ultimately, or might have at least, but ultimately they kept doing it 3 or 4 times. And at some point, obviously, the investigators started to figure out the pattern. One, they had found these Wi-Fi access points, and it took a little time before somebody recognized and realized, okay, now we're seeing this pattern. We're seeing these Wi-Fi access points. We know how they're getting in. What that means, they can only be so far. Now, they could have used a car or whatever, but apparently that was their mistake. They were picking targets that were near places where they could rent a room, hotel, or a rental space to use to be able to carry out their attack, because they thought it would be, I guess, too conspicuous to sit out in a van in the parking lot packing in via Wi-Fi. But they might have been better off doing it that way with, the license plates covered in a nondescript rental or something, so that they could have potentially hidden themselves better. But ultimately, they were traced to to the people renting the room, and they caught them. But it was a great, social engineering is what got them in. They just walked in and pretended to be IT people, and they got in. So there's a lot of different discussion of different attack types, but there's also really cool discussion of the different motivational techniques, effectively the factors that social engineers play on. Trying to gain your familiarity or trust, trying to scare you. Of course, a lot of these, act now like marketing campaigns, the people say that hurry up, buy now, it's going to expire. A lot of the spear phishing and phishing attacks will try to, this has to be dealt with right now kind of situation, trying to give you an urgency, hoping that you'll not think about it and go ahead and do it, because it looks like your VP is telling you you got to transfer $10,000 an hour. We're going to lose $1 million account. And so you transfer $10,000 and ask questions later. And that's what they're trying to play on. And so they talk a lot about it. There's actually a link to a video called The Social Conformity Experiment that's up on YouTube. And it comes, I don't even remember where the original source is, but you'll have to take a look at that. That is definitely sort of what some of the psychological factors at work, if you will, at play with regard to how this goes on. And so they talk, like I said, about all the different types of attacks. It's actually one of the things that, I have noticed, that there's a number of folks that are focused. That's their job, and of course they got reason to toot their own horn, of course. But as I've done research for our program and just in the field and learning more and more myself every day, I've run across different and sundry, firms that provide security services, of course, including particularly, as I was doing the pen test stuff this summer for CompTIA. And so I was looking very heavily in that area and ran across just a number of different ones where, various individuals or companies that do that type of service claim to be, 100% successful. They've always gotten in to their clients. Now, obviously there's a marketing reason to brag and toot your horn and say you're that good, but you can always get in. And I'm sure there are hackers out there that have always succeeded in one form or another. But also I know the reality is that if you really dug into some of their statistics, I would assume, if you really knew the facts, that in many cases, the way they got in was through social engineering. And that's not to minimize its importance. It's actually to highlight it. In other words, that, the hackers, the pen testers, they try and fail sometimes against a fairly well-defended organization. Thank God, right? That not everybody always gets broken into. But that doesn't mean they didn't ultimately. If they had really been trying, they were able to trick somebody or whatever. And so many times, I think, as we'll see, the weakest link is the human link. In the security, sure, there's a zero-day exploit, then everybody's probably vulnerable to that. If there's a pretty rare esoteric exploit, maybe it's not a 0-day, but it's one that doesn't. But just the right combination of things have to come together, and then, sadly, unbeknownst to you, the dev team pushes out a new library in the application that then makes this exploit chain to that exploit, and now you've opened up a hole. And of course, assuming you don't do the really stupid thing, then you shouldn't have major holes. You should have to have. That should be what you're hoping a pen tester is finding, something rare, something really hard to do. So obviously the average person isn't, and now you can patch that hole before the 1 in a million who can do that kind of stuff actually comes to you. And that's the whole point of that active security. But one of the things is, even in the best defended organizations, and they have the best super great firewalls and all this other stuff, there is still humans working there. And so if you can figure out a way to exploit one of them, then of course you can claim your success, right? Because you were able to get into the system. It may not have been for a technical reason. Now, I'm not saying they can't do that either. And there's lots of really good folks out there. And maybe there's some who really could claim that they can break in truly to everything. But to say you're successful in a pen test is not the same thing as to say you can break into any system. And I would assume that based on what I've been seeing, most people are claiming to be successful at pen test, which includes usually a social engineering piece. And so as such, my bet is that many of them, especially against more secure targets, have found that the social engineering piece was a successful piece. Anyway, so a lot of good information in 4 on social engineering, and that leads us into 5. 5 is on what's called the social engineering toolkit. And basically, it's the first time we're going to be using one of the new virtual machines that we have created for this. Now, this is The only thing we've done here, and I'm going to switch back to screen share and give you a quick tour and then let you get both Kali and. Now we've played with Kali before, so I think I'm only sharing my Kali screen, and if I did, that's all I need, that's fine. You can see I've used this for a few different reasons, ignore the stuff on my desktop, but nonetheless, Kali is a GUI Linux distribution, has its own graphical desktop. It's based on the Debian Linux platform, which is what Ubuntu is based on. It is based on their very aggressive, most up-to-date repo. There's lots of updates with Kali and with the various tools that come with Kali. If you look under the menu, there are just all kinds of things to play with. And actually, any of these that have a little triangle out to the side, you can click on them, and there's even more stuff to play with. So Kali is full with hundreds and hundreds of tools. Now, we've used a few of them and used Kali at a command line already, which is the version that's in our GNS-M3 topology. But this is the full Kali. Some of you have played with it by either putting it in the GNS3 topology as an optional exercise, or just because some of you want to play with this stuff and have already created your own VMs of this. This one that we've provided, you simply have to download, and then within VirtualBox, you import that appliance in, and then it'll show up on your list of VirtualBox appliances. You're going to download a number of provided virtual machines. And this is the only thing that's been done to this version that we provide with the course materials is that we've set up the IP information a little differently. We've given it 2 different network adapters, and that is because we want one of them to still be able to access the outside world, at least through NAT of VirtualBox, so we can get updates and things like that. But then the other one is tied to a local dummy network, basically a host only in VirtualBox, so that we can attack some of the other machines that we provide. You'll use next week in lesson 6, and as well as in lesson 8. We provide a server that acts as the email and web server for that spear phishing campaign, and then a client that acts as the victim effectively. And so you'll get to play. You'll just need to download those from the server, and then you will import them all into VirtualBox. You will not have all of them running at the same time. There's no need for that. Usually you're only running 1 or 2 for like lesson 5. All you need is this one, the Kali one, and it's all about getting Kali set up, giving you a quick tour. As you can see, as we run around through here, like there's Nmap right there, middle of the right-hand side. Oops, I went off the row. So that was good old Nmap, right? So that's one of our things. And then, of course, we've got things we've seen before, like NIC2, Nmap again. Some show up under multiple categories. SQL maps there, we've used it for up until this point. Some more database tools, including SQL map, etc. Password attackers. Hydra is not on the list, but it is actually in the system somewhere. It's not on the default list. But Medusa is similar, and Hydra is on Kali Linux. It's just you would have to run it at the command line, and it's not from one of these menus. Now, one of the things is you see all these pretty icons and you see all this stuff, but one of the things to note is that when you launch, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I would say it's a huge amount, if not the vast majority of the programs. When you run them, what you ultimately get is you get a terminal, because they're all command line tools. That's why we've spent so much time in this program teaching you the command line. So here we are. There's basically, by clicking that, all it did was run Nmap with no parameters, and it tells us the version, and here's the help file that comes up by default. We've seen before. We've played with a lot of these different options. There's samples at the bottom, and so we could begin to do things. Of course, you're going to use it to scan and to work with against the provided other virtual machines. And so we will be using the standalone, you'll be using the GNS3 topology effectively for a couple lessons, and then for most of the other remaining lessons in this class, which is very hands-on, you will be using these provided VMs in different combinations. And ultimately, the very last lesson actually includes a capture the flag VM, but we'll talk about that next week. So fairly easy to, you got to learn a lot of different tools. There's Firefox and a terminal here, the way to just browse your files. Of course, the Metasploitable framework, which is all part of this. Armitage, Burp Suite, Montego, different tools. Many of these are covered in that lesson, at least a quick overview of what they do. We don't cover every one of them, too many tools to cover in our short program. We tried to cover examples and highlights of all the different ones, and you get to play with some different ones. And particularly when you get down to, you're encouraged in lesson 10 to play with more as you try to beat that capture the flag. And even some of the guys will help walk you through using some additional tools as part of this suite. But as you can see, once again, there's a ton of tools in Kelly. It broken up somewhat nicely, and of course then there's different, sometimes they show up multiple times, but then here is one we're going to talk about today, the social engineering toolkit. As I said, like most of these programs, it's actually a command line program. SQL Map is a Python program, right? Some of these other programs are written in different languages, whether it's Ruby or Python. And so here we are with the main menu of the set or social engineering toolkit program. The social engineering toolkit is a very neat package. The main part of what you'll do for the most part is you'll spend time under that very first menu, number 1, social engineering attacks. There are third-party modules that can be added. I will tell you this, that the number 4 option is kind of, it's even showing me that my version is 774, and there's a new 779, so it says, please update set to the latest, at least before we submit any issues to them. But if I try to update set with this command, it's going to come back and say, oh, you're in Kali, update Kali then. And so you would have to force or do the Kali updates or wait for them to pop up, which they do periodically to say that there are updates available for Kali. In our case, we're not going to do much except play within, like I said, and this is just a menu-driven program. I don't remember what this is written in behind the scenes. I want to say Python, but I won't swear to that. But and of course, you just finished up a Python class not too long ago, and this kind of looks like the menu of the to-do app in that Python class, right? Just type in a number. And so when we go to number 1, we'll see all these different attack types that this thing will help us do. Spear phishing attacks, website attacks, infectious media generator. What's that? Well, we can like make an infected boot up stick. That's a pretty common trick that attackers sometimes do, is if they're doing a pen test or trying to attack an organization, is they may, have done some research on the organization. There's a great Dilbert cartoon that is about this whole idea. The boss finds a USB stick, and Dilbert's, worried about it being a virus and threatening to sell his stock, kind of thing, because the boss, of course, is stupid and gonna plug it in, thinks it's no risk at all. But this is actually a not uncommon trick for pen testers or true hackers to try to get into a system. We'll distribute some USBs in some form or fashion. Maybe we just drop them, as we call them, drop sticks. We drop a couple of them, like we've left them on a bench outside where people come, to hang out and have their lunch or smoke or whatever at the target we're after. And, so that way somebody finds it and thinks, yay, I found the new. And then, of course, ideally, that just plugging that in could infect the machine. But then there could be stuff on it that's, like makes it look like, maybe it's movies or images or something. Somebody wants to open those documents because of the way they're labeled, super secret information, insider, whatever it is that's going to potentially, trick somebody into running more stuff, which then, of course, could load more tools or backdoors. And we can do things like that in number 4. We can generate a payload in a listener. And basically, that's creating a custom payload. And there's actually, beyond the fact that Social Engineering Toolkit has its menus and it ultimately works with the Metasploit Toolkit behind the scene, usually there are even other things you can do to help obfuscate. So like if you just actually go through the standard, create a payload in listener, and you try to send that like to your friend, then most likely his virus, the standard stuff in Windows 10 is going to catch it and recognize that it's Metasploit and it sees it. So how does this work? If the basic, well, you have to trick people. You have to try to hide it. There's different ways to kind of hide the code. That's a little beyond where we're going to go, but it's just something for you to be aware of. So there's different tricks and other tools within Kali and third-party tools you can add that would allow you to mask your code so it doesn't look like the same signature of the standard meta-exploitable, meta-interpreter payload. There's mass mail attacks. That Arduino is another USB, or you can use it to build. Basically, that's a series of. If you've heard of like the Raspberry Pi, they have a whole community and framework on building sort of microcomputers and different applications, and so we can take advantage of that. We have wireless. We can set up like a fake rogue access point. and we have PowerShell attack vectors. We can do SMS, it's text message spoofing. So just like you can spoof an email, that's becoming more and more common to get a text message that has a link. Hey, you've won a prize, click here. And of course, this is really a phishing campaign. And so if we go into any, like down to the first menu, it says, do you want to perform a mass email attack? Do you want to create a file format payload? Do you want to create a social engineering toolkit? If you don't like where you went, you can just type 99 to return back up a step. So we can take a look down into the second part. We have Java applet attack methods, Metasploit, browser exploit methods, credential harvesting. That's one you're going to do an exercise for actually as part of the lesson 6, because what we're going to do in that is basically take you through a simulated exercise in you're going to send an email, even though we'll use the mass email, that option, as you'll see if we go down into that mass mailer option 5, it actually has right off the bat, do you want to send, it says mass mailer, but then it says, do you want to send a one or do you want to send a many? So you can use it just to send a single target. So basically the mass mailer is, maybe that's not the best way to label that menu, but it's the way it's been for a long time, but it covers both phishing and spear phishing. So we're going to send one email to a particular victim on our network, and we're going to then clone that ostensibly victim's company's website and have them, by the email we send, ideally, and make it look like when they click the link it's going to take them to their site, but redirect them to the IP of our attack site. And then when they are able to log in and or attempt to log into the site, we will capture their credentials. And it's a simple little exercise, but it just begins to give you an idea of the power and how some of these things, because this software has the ability to clone any website, and it actually already has, like if I just start to go down and say I want to do a single, well, I got to fill all that out. I don't want to do that right now. And we can use different servers. You can see these are the settings. I didn't mean to go into all this, so I'm fixing to break out of it and start over. But we can use a Gmail account to attack. It amazes me how well they support Gmail out of the box. I guess it's just, but you can set it up to use Yahoo or any. So basically, you create a burner throwaway account and use that email as supposedly where you're sending it through. Or in the case, we're going to use the server of the victim ourselves, or you might use it. Of course, you want to make sure you aren't leaving any traces in reality. So this isn't the example. This is a high-level exercise to show you how it all works. You would have to do a little more. You wouldn't want to do it, from your own machine directly, and that's not normally the way it's done. But the idea is that you will have worked your way through one of these and see how this system can help generate a custom email that you can send to one or many people. You can have it tied, to a fake website, or to if you're sending an attachment that's going to, hopefully certain people will open it. When they do, it'll open up a back door and connect back to you. And you now have access to those machines, assuming that you can get that to actually get through and to be run and to get past the antivirus. In our case, we don't even have to worry about the antivirus, because we're really just trying to trick our victim, which will be ourselves, into clicking this link. And then when they come back, they're going to see a website that looks just like the website that they're used to seeing. And this actually already has built-in templates for like Twitter and Facebook. I mean, literally, it'll make, you can tell it, that's what you could say, like if you wanted to use a Twitter attack and you wanted to send somebody, you knew was on Twitter, a message, you could fake a message to kind of look like Twitter. Hey, there's a problem with your password. You need to log in and reset your password. Click here to do so. The click here actually points not to twitter.com login, but to some IP/login or whatever. And on your listening site, which, like I said, in this case would be this Cali, in the real world, the hacker would probably have taken somebody else's machine over, right? And then used in that machine to be where it hosts that fake website. But of course, as soon as somebody that does fall for that clicks that links and goes and logs into what they think is the real Twitter page, that is really just a fake shim page. It'll capture their credentials and redirect them to the real Twitter, and they'll be like, huh. And the idea is that they'll just log in again and go on. And then, of course, now you have their credentials. And this thing has a website cloner, which will let you clone any website. And even though our example is pretty simple, you'll get the idea of how powerful these tools are. Now, like I said, out of the box, thankfully, the major antivirus and Windows and etc. Are aware of sort of Kali existence and meta exploitable, in the meta exploit and the meta interpreter. That is one of the payloads you can generate. I'll give you the look at that real fast before we wrap this up for today. But if I go down into, let's see, create a payload, and then you'll see these are all these different kinds. We have reverse shells, TCPI. We can use the meta interpreter, which is a specific, part of the Metasploit framework, its own command interpreter that you can basically connect. And you can see we can basically, now most of these attacks, as you can see, are geared toward Windows, be given its size and market share. But there's different forms depending upon which version of Windows and depending on what you're attempting to do, and how you want to obfuscate it. And then, of course, you would need to generally in real life do more things. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you, or kind of two things real fast, because you'll need them for the next lesson. If you, there's really a cool feature in most modern GUIs, even just it's possible to do in any other version, but Kali has this rule. They know that you're going to end up using a lot of different things. You're going to have a lot of windows open, a browser, a tool, Burp Suite, command prompts, whatever. So you can switch to these virtual desktops. And now you have a whole new desktop to work with, and then switch back as you need to. Now, if we just click the button for the terminal, we'll get the terminal brought to this area. We don't want that. We're going to right click, and then we can choose new window. And now I have a new window, and I still have my one running in the social engineering toolkit. One of the things, and there's different ways around this, and many people break things up, but when you're working with this social engineering toolkit and you start building something, you start building a spear phishing campaign, you start building a credential harvesting clone site, you start building a payload like this, what's actually happening is in your home folder, and if we do an ls-la and look, we'll see that there is this .set folder. And so if we look in there, we'll see that there are right now some set options and a version lock. Right now, there's nothing in here because I haven't really done anything. But if I was to start, going down the road to building one of these payloads, then what will happen is, so like we just pick a one, the IP address of our listener. I'm just going to make something up for this example. And with the port, we'll just stick with 80. Generating the payload. Please be patient. Now, this is literally creating a executable file that you could theoretically then do some other work to hide and mask, and that you could send it in so it looks like a PDF, for example. Somebody opens it, they're really running this exe, and when they do, then it's going to open up a shell back to your machine or to wherever you set it up to do. Now, what many times happens, instead of doing it like this, where you generate it all on this machine and then run from your own machine, see, it says, do you want me to start the payload and listener now? If we do that, then it's going to fire up Metasploitable in the background and create a listener so that if somebody ran that program, it would connect back to us, right? And we would then have a reverse shell onto their machine, and we could do some stuff from there, right? I'm not going to do that. All I wanted to show is that when we come over, whoops, I don't need a 3, sorry, back to 2. If we take a look in that folder again, we'll see there's something in there now. There's something called payload exe. So in effect, you just built your first Trojan. Now, unless I can tell you from my own experimentation and knowledge and experience that if you just tried to run that on Windows, Windows is going to throw a fit that it recognizes that that's a meta interpreter or a reverse shell. It's a known thing to the. But if we obfuscate that with some additional techniques, then we might be able to get it past an antivirus and might be able to get it run by an end user. When they run it, then of course we now have a shell on their machine. But what I wanted to point out is this stuff lives here until I basically, if I quit out of this and actually quit the program completely, this stuff will still be here. But if I then start another project, it's going to overwrite everything in this folder with the new setup for a new project. So if you really were building a payload that you were planning to use, you would need to copy it out of here, either using the file folder icon on the menu bar or just using the CP command change into that folder, copy it up to your desktop or something, so or put it in another folder. That way, you keep a copy of that, and of course, you probably want to name it something else, so you know exactly what it was. But these are just the defaults. The reason I point this out is the same thing happens when you create the the spearfish campaign, and you're going to have to actually. The way we're going to do it is we're going to have you send the email first. We're assuming in our scenario that we're sending it at night, for example, and so that it's going to be waiting there for the user when they come to work in the morning. And then we are going to have done that. It's going to have created its template and stuff inside of this folder. But then when we start to do the credential harvesting part, when we copy the website and set up that listener and everything, it's going to have changed this folder. And so we're going to want to make sure we do the email first, then come into this part. And there are other ways around that, like I said, a little beyond where we're going. But the idea is that each time you run Social Engineering Toolkit and run a campaign, it generates all of its files. It's kind of temporary files underneath this .set folder. And so if you really were building payloads that you were going to use in the next stage of your attack, you'd want to copy those out before you went ahead and started to create your spearphishing email. Then you can attach that back to it later, especially if you had done some additional techniques to get it past antivirus and things like that. So anyway, that's actually through lesson 5. Lesson 6 is that exercise. I wanted to give you some information. So we cover all the first 5 lessons and kind of give you some information and get you ready. In 6, like I said, if you look at this, the lesson 1 is based around the spreadsheet and the analysis of comparing and contrasting threats and threat actors. Lesson 2 is about the different types of indicators. Lesson 3 is the baselining. That's an exercise in the topology. Then lesson 4 is a social engineering piece, a little research, I believe. And then 5 is getting Kali set up, playing around with the social engineering toolkit, playing around with Kali full version now, having some fun, getting used to it. And then for 6, you will actually set up a couple of the other VMs, the sample, sort of our test server and our victim machine, the dev client. And then you will actually be able to get all 3 of those talking, and you will be able to carry out the exercise if you follow along with the exercise. And you will have conducted your own spearphishing campaign. Then in 7, as we go on next week, we'll talk about some additional vulnerabilities. And then we have 2 more really hands-on lessons. 8 is once again with Kali and the meta-exploitable virtual machine. We played with meta-exploitable before, but we used the one that I created within the topology, which is actually about an 80% meta-exploitable to be honest. It doesn't support everything in meta-exploitable, and a couple things, particularly this network file system thing I wanted to show you is not supported in the GNS3 version, mainly because it requires an older base kernel to run on and to make that stuff work. So this version is the full version of the VM, basically as they provide it, and every one of the possible exploits work. And so I'll take you through a few more take things there. Then we'll return briefly to the topology in lesson 9 to do one more vulnerability. We'll go back and play a little bit more with the damn vulnerable web application, but we'll be doing it using, instead of SQL injection like last time, we'll be playing with both file and command injection type of attacks and talk a little bit about that again. And then we'll wrap up with a lesson 10 on red team, blue team stuff. And a very important concept, since it's kind of basically your final project, capture the flag systems. But we'll talk about that next week. I believe we have an office hour. I mean, a one-on-one scheduled for later tonight. And then I have the late night office hour as well. So I will see you soon. Talk to you then. Bye.